When did someone use your child's disability against them? I woke up at 2 a.m. to find my autistic son in the kitchen, staring at the locked pantry. Buddy, what are you doing? Counting, he whispered. Mister. Bleak says warriors count to 10,000 when they're hungry. It makes the hunger go away. The thing was, Theo takes everything literally. It's part of his autism. He doesn't understand when adults aren't being serious. I called Mr. Bleak the next morning. Hey, this is Tom Litt, Theo's dad. I wanted to ask about some things Theo's been saying about food. Mr. Bleak laughed. Oh gosh, what's he telling you now? You know how these kids are, especially the ones who claim to have autism, always looking for attention. That stung. He's been refusing meals because he says warriors have to earn... Look, his tone shifted. I served 3 tours in Iraq. I know the difference between real disabilities and kids who've been coddled. He paused. If Theo can't handle basic mental toughness exercises, maybe he belongs in the special class with the other pretenders. Well, it was easier to doubt myself than believe a teacher would hurt my son, so I just hung up. But Theo kept getting thinner. His lunchbox came home untouched every day. When I asked why, he'd just say, didn't earn it, and go silent. At pickup on Friday, another mom pulled me aside. My daughter says Theo stays in at lunch for advanced training. Mr. Oblique locks the door and covers the window. She swears she heard Theo crying once. The following Tuesday, I got the call. Theo had collapsed during PE. By the time I reached the hospital, he was conscious but hooked up to monitors, his face pale against the white sheets. The ER doctor pulled me aside, her expression grim. Mr. Litt, when we examined Theo, we found something concerning. He's severely malnourished. Has he been eating at home? My stomach dropped. His lunchbox is always empty. He's lost 12 pounds. His blood work shows he hasn't been eating properly for weeks, maybe longer. She studied my face. I was about to answer when Theo, who I thought was sleeping, spoke up. Mr. Bleak says warriors eat only when they earn it. The room went silent. What do you mean, earn it? The social worker asked gently. Theo's eyes stayed closed. If you can't hold your breath for 2 minutes, you didn't earn breakfast. Mr. Oblique says I'm special because I follow the real rules. My hands started shaking. Theo, when was the last time you earned a meal? Tuesday. I held my breath for 2 minutes and 13 seconds. It was Friday. The social worker was writing frantically. Theo, does Mr. Bleak check if you've eaten? Theo's voice was small and shaky. He weighs me every Monday. He said I'm winning. Winning what? The Warrior Challenge. First one under 70 pounds becomes a real soldier. The others are just civilians. I called the other parents that night. Their kids confirmed it, Mr. Bleak joked to the whole class about starving themselves, and he knew my son would be the only one to take it seriously. I went to the principal the next morning with everything. She smiled sadly. Mr. Bleak is a veteran. He's unconventional, yes, but the kids love him. Theo is probably just taking things too literally. I'm sure you know how autistic children can be. He's targeting my son specifically because, without proof that Mr. Bleak is directly telling Theo not to eat, my hands are tied. Maybe Theo needs more support than a mainstream classroom can provide. The threat was clear. If I pushed this, they'd kick Theo out for being too autistic for regular school. And with that on his record, no other school would take him. I tried the police. The officer barely glanced at the notebook. A teacher talking about warrior mindset isn't illegal. Has he physically prevented your son from eating? No? Then this is a parenting issue. The next morning, I followed Theo to school and watched through the classroom window. The other kids were eating snacks while Theo sat rigidly at his desk, hands folded. Mr. Oblique walked over and whispered something. Theo nodded, his face glowing with pride. After school, Theo collapsed again, back in the hospital. The doctor was blunt. One more incident and we're calling CPS for medical neglect. But it's his teacher. Then remove him from that teacher's class. I just smiled, because all I needed was a confession from Mr. Bleak, and I knew exactly how to get it. I called my brother Diego, a construction worker who did 2 years for violent self-defense. Remember what Dad used to do to get us to tell the truth? Yeah. I need to know what this teacher is telling my son. Silence. Then, teachers work late on Fridays, right? Alone? On the day, Diego brought zip ties and a baseball bat. For show, he said. People talk faster when they're scared. I didn't care about my job anymore. I didn't care about assault charges. My son was dying, convinced that starvation made him special, and the man who did this was about to explain exactly why. Just remember, Diego said as we walked toward the school, we're not leaving until he tells us everything. The side door was propped open with a brick just like Diego said it would be. My hands were shaking as we pushed through into the dark hallway. The school felt different at night, empty and cold, our footsteps echoing off the walls. Diego walked ahead of me, the bat hanging loose in his right hand. We passed the bulletin boards covered in kids' drawings, the water fountains, the trophy case. Everything looked normal but felt wrong. My heart was beating, so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. We turned the corner toward Mr. Bleak's classroom at the end of the hall. Light was coming from under his door. Through the little window I could see him sitting at his desk, marking papers under a desk lamp. He had reading glasses on and was making notes with a red pen. Diego reached for the doorknob and turned it slowly. It wasn't locked. We looked at each other one more time. This was it. Diego pushed the door open and we walked in. Mr. Bleak's head snapped up from his papers. His face went from surprised to confused to angry in about 2 seconds. He recognized me right away, and his eyes narrowed when he saw Diego behind me with the bat. "Mr. Lit, you can't be here after hours," he said, trying to sound tough, but his voice cracked a little. His eyes kept going back to the bat in Diego's hand. I pulled out my phone and hit record while Diego moved to stand by the door. My hands were still shaking, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk about what you've been doing to my son." Mr. Bleak stood up fast, his chair rolling back and hitting the wall. "This is breaking and entering. I'm calling security." He reached for the phone on his desk, but Diego took a step forward and Mr. Bleak froze. His hand stopped halfway to the phone. "Sit down," Diego said, real quiet. Mr. Bleak looked at him, then at me, then slowly sat back down in his chair. I walked over and put my phone on the desk between us, making sure the camera could see everything. The red recording light was blinking. "You've been starving my son." The words came out harder than I meant them to. Mr. Bleak leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "These kids today are soft, especially the ones claiming disabilities." His voice got that teacher tone, like he was giving a lecture. "They need structure, discipline, not more coddling from parents who want to make excuses." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the photos from the hospital. Theo hooked up to IVs, his face white as paper, his arms so thin you could see every bone. I slammed them down on his desk hard enough to make his coffee mug jump. "He's 7 years old and you convinced him he had to earn food by holding his breath." My voice was getting louder even though I was trying to stay calm. Mr. Bleak picked up one of the photos and looked at it for a second before putting it back down. "I never told him not to eat." He shrugged like it was nothing. "He just took my warrior stories too seriously." He looked right at me. "That's not my fault if he can't understand metaphors." Diego moved closer to the desk, not doing anything threatening, but definitely making his presence felt. The bat tapped against his leg as he walked. I leaned forward over the desk. "Other kids heard you tell Theo specifically that warriors don't eat until they prove themselves." I watched his face real careful, looking for any sign of guilt. Mr. Bleak's jaw tightened, and something shifted in his expression. The fake concern dropped from his face completely, and his eyes went cold and hard like I'd never seen them before. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms, looking at me like I was something stuck to his shoe. His mouth twisted into this ugly smile that made my skin crawl. I kept the phone steady even though my hand wanted to shake, making sure the camera caught everything. He started talking about how Theo was weak, how kids like him pretend to have problems for attention, how he was trying to fix what I wouldn't. The words hit me like punches, but I forced myself to stay still and keep recording. Diego shifted by the door, the bat tapping against his leg, and I could feel the anger coming off him in waves. I needed more though, needed him to say exactly what he'd done. So I asked about the Monday weigh-ins he'd mentioned to Theo. His eyes got smaller and meaner when I said the words 70-pound warrior challenge. He actually looked proud when he started explaining how he tracked their progress on this chart he pulled from his desk drawer. The paper had all the kids' names with their weights written in red pen next to dates going back months. Theo's name had stars next to it, showing he was winning whatever sick game this was. My stomach turned seeing my son's weight dropping week after week in neat little numbers like it was some kind of achievement. He kept talking about how the strong kids were ignored his challenges, but the weak ones showed themselves. How Theo wanted to be special so badly, he'd do anything anyone suggested. My fists clenched so hard my nails cut into my palms, but I kept the phone recording, kept my voice steady when I asked if that was included starving himself to death. He actually shrugged at that, said something about natural selection, and Theo being too stupid to understand metaphors. The way he said stupid made something snap inside me, and I started to move forward, but then we all heard it at the same time. Footsteps coming down the hallway, getting closer. Diego looked out the door window quick and held up 2 fingers, mouthing that someone was coming. We all froze, me still holding the phone, Diego gripping the bat, Mr. Bleak sitting there with that weight chart still on his desk. The footsteps stopped right outside, and the door handle turned. Benjamin Tucker walked in wearing his school resource officer uniform, with his hand already on his gun. His eyes went from Diego with the bat to me with the phone to Mr. Bleak at the desk, and I saw him processing everything real fast. Nobody moved for what felt like forever, but was probably 2 seconds. Mr. Bleak's whole body language changed instantly, slumping forward like he was scared, his voice going high and shaky as he started saying we broke in and threatened him with weapons. He pointed at the bat and demanded Benjamin arrest us for assault, putting on this whole victim act that was completely different from the cold monster he'd been 30 seconds ago. I held up my phone to show it was recording, trying to explain we just wanted him to admit what he'd done to Theo, that we had proof now. Benjamin kept his hand on his gun but didn't draw it, his eyes going back and forth between all of us like he was trying to figure out what was really happening. He told us all not to move in that cop voice that means business, then focused on Diego and me. His face wasn't angry exactly, but it was serious and firm when he said we needed to come with him right now. Diego set the bat down slow and careful on a desk, keeping his hands visible the whole time. I saved the recording and put my phone in my pocket, watching Mr. Bleak's face change to this smug look like he knew he'd won again. Benjamin walked us out with one hand still near his weapon, not rough but definitely in control, making sure we stayed in front of him. The hallway felt longer than when we'd come in, our footsteps echoing off the walls. Other classroom doors were closed and dark, the whole school empty except for us. Benjamin didn't say anything until we got to the parking lot where his patrol car was parked next to Diego's truck. He had us stand by the car while he called for backup, keeping us in sight the whole time. 2 more patrol cars showed up within 5 minutes, and they separated Diego and me right away. I got put in the back of Benjamin's car while Diego went with another officer. The drive to the station felt surreal, watching the familiar streets go by through the metal screen between the front and back seats. At the station, they took us to different parts of the building, and I ended up in this small gray room with a metal table and 2 chairs. They took my phone, my wallet, everything in my pockets, and put it all in a plastic bag. I sat there alone for maybe 20 minutes before a detective came in, a woman with short gray hair and tired eyes who looked like she'd seen everything twice. She had my phone in an evidence bag and a yellow legal pad for notes. When she asked what happened, I told her everything from the beginning, about Theo in the hospital, about the other parents' stories, about trying every legal option first. She actually listened this time, not like the officer who'd dismissed me before. She took notes and asked specific questions about dates and times and who said what. When I mentioned the recording, she picked up the evidence bag with my phone and asked if I'd consent to her listening to it. I said yes immediately and watched her face while she played it through the little speaker. Her expression didn't change much, but I saw her jaw tighten when Mr. Bleak talked about natural selection and Theo being too stupid. She paused it twice to write down exact quotes, underlining some parts multiple times. When it finished, she looked at me for a long time without saying anything. She finally leaned back in her chair and tapped her pen on the legal pad. He admitted to the weigh-ins and targeting your son's disability, she said slowly. But here's the problem with what you did tonight. She explained that anything, Mr. Bleak said while Diego stood there with a bat, probably wouldn't count in court. You can't take justice into your own hands like that, she added, though her voice sounded softer than before. I started to argue, but she held up her hand. I get it, I really do, but the law doesn't work that way. She left me alone again, and I sat there thinking about how messed up everything was. About 2 hours later, the door opened, and this woman in a sharp suit walked in carrying a briefcase. Tom Litt? I'm Shreya Agrawal. Diego called me from his holding cell. She moved fast, pulling out papers and a tablet, already taking notes before she even sat down. She asked to hear the recording, and I watched her face get tighter with each word, Mr. Bleak said. Okay, so you're in trouble, but this recording is still damaging to him even if we can't use it in court. She worked her phone while talking to me, making calls to people she knew. The detective came back with paperwork, and Shreya immediately started negotiating. They went back and forth about charges, and I caught pieces about criminal trespass and conspiracy to commit assault. Shreya pulled the detective aside, and they talked in low voices by the door. When they came back, the detective explained I was charged, but Shreya had arranged for quick processing. Diego was getting hit harder because of his record, something about enhanced charges for repeat offenders. Shreya worked through the whole night making calls and filling out forms. She got us both released on bail by morning, though Diego's was way higher than mine. This is going to complicate everything with your son, she warned as we walked to her car. CPS is definitely getting involved now. Sure enough, when Shreya dropped me at my house, there was already a guy in a suit waiting by my front door. Mr. Litt? I'm Manuel Gray from Child Protective Services. He had this calm voice, but his eyes were serious. Your son is currently in protective custody at the hospital. My legs almost gave out. We need to determine if you're a safe placement for him given the recent criminal charges. The words hit me like punches. I'd tried to protect Theo, and now they were taking him away from me. Manuel explained the whole process while I stood there feeling numb. I'd get supervised visits until the criminal stuff was resolved, and they approved a safety plan. He handed me paperwork with visit times and rules I had to follow. The next morning, I went to the hospital for my first supervised visit. They gave me 1 hour with a social worker sitting in the corner taking notes. Theo was confused when I walked in, looking around for my stuff. Why can't you stay? He asked in that small voice. Did I do something wrong? I had to fight back tears while explaining it was complicated grown-up stuff. The social worker wrote down everything we said. Theo kept asking when he could come home, and I couldn't give him a real answer. That afternoon, Shreya called to say a reporter named Ibrahim Peterson had contacted her about the arrest. Don't talk to him yet, she said firmly, but he's already digging into Mr. Bleak's background and finding stuff. She said he'd found problems at other schools, but we needed to be careful. 2 days later, the school board called an emergency meeting that filled up the auditorium. The principal stood at the front and announced Mr. Bleak was on paid administrative leave pending investigation. Parents started yelling from both sides. Some dad who said he was a veteran too defended Mr. Bleak's methods. He teaches kids real discipline, not this soft participation trophy garbage, he shouted. But then other parents stood up with their own stories about weird stuff, Mr. Bleak had said to their kids. The room got so loud the board president kept banging her gavel. That night, Shreya got a call from Faith Owens, the school counselor. She wanted to meet, but only through Shreya because she was scared. Faith had been documenting concerns about Mr. Bleak for months, but nobody listened. She had dates and quotes and specific incidents all written down, Shreya said Faith's notes could be huge for us, but she wouldn't come forward officially yet. She was worried about losing her job or worse. The next supervised visit was even harder than the first. Theo was meeting with a nutritionist when I arrived, and I heard him through the door. "I miss Mr. Bleak," he told her quietly. "He made me special." The nutritionist asked what he meant, and Theo explained about the Warrior Challenge. "I was winning," he said with this proud little smile. "I was almost at 70 pounds. My heart broke all over again hearing that." Even after everything, Theo still thought starving himself was an achievement. The nutritionist looked at me through the window with this sad expression. She came out later and explained the trauma went really deep. "He's internalized these beliefs about food and worth," she said carefully. "Recovery is going to take a long time." Manuel was there taking notes about everything. He wrote down Theo's comments about missing Mr. Bleak as evidence of ongoing psychological harm. The next day, I got called back to court for Diego's bail hearing and watched the prosecutor stand up with a thick folder. She pulled out Diego's record from his assault case 2 years ago and started listing every reason he was dangerous. The judge listened to her argue about flight risk and previous violence, while Diego sat there in orange jumpsuit and chains. When the judge revoked his bail, Diego just nodded at me before they took him back to county. I walked out of the courthouse feeling sick because my brother was going to jail for helping me protect my son. That afternoon, Shreya came to my apartment with a stack of papers she'd been working on. She'd typed up everything from my recording of Mr. Bleak and added all the notes Faith had secretly given us about other kids he'd targeted. We sent it to the school district's main office by certified mail and got a response 3 days later from their lawyer saying they were investigating but couldn't discuss personnel matters. Meanwhile, Manuel called to schedule his home safety visit, and I spent the whole week getting ready. I installed cabinet locks on everything, put up meal charts on the fridge, created detailed food logs showing what Theo ate every day. When Manuel showed up with his clipboard, he walked through every room taking pictures and making notes. He looked at the locks and schedules and said it was good, but my criminal charges were still a problem for placement. 2 weeks later, the prosecutor's office sent Shreya a letter with their plea offer. They'd drop it to misdemeanor trespass with 2 years probation if I agreed not to sue the school or pursue any civil action against them. Shreya read it to me over the phone and said it wasn't the worst deal she'd seen, but taking it meant Mr. Bleak would never face real consequences for what he did to Theo. The next school board meeting was packed with angry parents on both sides of the room. When they opened for public comment, this dad who was wearing an army hat stood up first and started defending Mr. Bleak. He said the warrior mindset made his son more confident, and that parents today were too soft on their kids. 2 other parents clapped and nodded along while he talked about how Mr. Bleak was the best teacher the school had. But then a mom from Theo's class stood up with her daughter's notebook and started reading quotes her kid had written down. Mr. Bleak had told her daughter she was weak for needing a snack, that real warriors could go days without food, that she'd never be strong if she kept eating like a pig. Another parent jumped up and said her son came home crying because Mr. Bleak made him do push-ups during lunch instead of eating. Then a third parent started yelling about how his kid was told he didn't deserve food because he failed a math test. The whole room exploded with people shouting at each other, and the board president kept banging her gavel trying to get control. Security had to escort 2 dads out when they almost started fighting in the aisle. 3 days after that meeting, Ibrahim's article came out in the local paper with the headline about a teacher under investigation for student welfare concerns. He'd found records showing Mr. Bleak was disciplined at his last school for making kids do excessive physical training during class time. The teachers' union rep called the paper the next day, claiming it was a smear campaign against a decorated veteran, but people were already sharing the article all over social media. I was reading the comments online when Theo's therapist called to schedule an emergency session. When I got there, she told me Theo had been having nightmares every night about failing warrior challenges. In his dreams, I stopped loving him because he couldn't hold his breath long enough or couldn't make it to 70 pounds. She said the psychological damage went deeper than she'd initially thought, and recovery could take months or even years of intensive therapy. I sat in my car after that session just shaking with rage at what Mr. Bleak had done to my kid's mind. That's when Faith finally decided to come forward officially after seeing Ibrahim's article. She met with Shreya first to hand over 3 notebooks full of documentation going back 6 months. She had dates, times, specific quotes, names of other kids Mr. Bleak had targeted, especially the ones with learning disabilities or autism. The district's lawyer called Shreya the next day, suddenly very interested in meeting to discuss a possible resolution. A week later, I had to go back to court for Diego's sentencing. The judge gave him 6 months with credit for time served, which meant he'd be out in 4 months if he stayed out of trouble. But his construction company had already fired him, and his girlfriend came up to me crying outside the courthouse. She said she didn't know how she was going to pay rent without Diego's income, and I felt the guilt crushing me even more. I gave her what money I had, but it wasn't nearly enough to make up for what my family cost them. 2 weeks passed before my next supervised visit with Theo at the hospital. The social worker sat in the corner taking notes while I helped him with a puzzle. "Dad, when can I go back to Mr. Bleak's class?" Theo asked without looking up. My chest got tight. "Why do you want to go back?" He kept moving puzzle pieces around. "I'm almost at 70 pounds. I'm winning the warrior challenge." The social worker's pen moved faster across her notepad. I tried to explain that he wouldn't be going back to that class, but Theo just went quiet and wouldn't look at me for the rest of the visit. That same afternoon, a courier showed up at my apartment with legal papers. Mr. Oblique's lawyer was threatening to sue me for defamation if I shared the recording with anyone else. Shreya called me after I forwarded the papers to her. "He's getting desperate, which means we're winning something," she said. The next morning, the district's lawyer contacted Shreya about a meeting. They sat me in a conference room with 3 administrators who pushed papers across the table. The district would transfer Theo to a different school with a full-time aide and counseling services. They made it clear this wasn't an admission of guilt, just acknowledgement that keeping Theo near Mr. Oblique would be harmful. I signed everything they put in front of me. Meanwhile, the prosecutor kept pushing for jail time on my trespassing charge. Shreya spent 3 days negotiating and finally got it down to just probation with community service. The judge made me stand while he lectured about taking the law into my own hands. I nodded and apologized and accepted the plea deal because avoiding jail meant I could focus on getting Theo back. Manuel scheduled another meeting after I finished the court-ordered parenting class about trauma-informed care. He reviewed my completion certificate and the instructor's positive report. "I'm approving unsupervised visits starting this weekend," he said. Having Theo home for a full day felt like breathing again after being underwater for months. We ate pizza and watched cartoons, and I didn't mention Mr. Oblique once. Ibrahim's second article came out that Monday with quotes from child psychology experts explaining how kids who think literally are especially vulnerable to authority manipulation. The experts used terms like exploitation of neurodivergent trust patterns and explained how teachers in positions of power could cause lasting psychological damage. Mr. Oblique's union didn't release any statement this time. The school board held an emergency session that Tuesday night. They voted to implement new training about neurodiversity and appropriate motivational techniques for all district teachers. The board president read a prepared statement about continuous improvement and learning from difficult situations. Nobody mentioned Mr. Oblique by name, but everyone knew why they were really there. Word got around that he was negotiating his exit with the district. 2 weeks later, Theo started at his new school across town. His aide was named Miss Johnson, and she specialized in autism support. I watched through the classroom door as she introduced herself to Theo. She explained exactly what would happen each day, when he would eat lunch, where he could go if he felt overwhelmed. Theo relaxed his shoulders for the first time in months. She made everything clear and simple without any confusing warrior talk or hidden rules. That same week, my boss called me into his office. The company had a policy about criminal convictions, and my misdemeanor trespassing charge meant automatic termination. He said he was sorry, but rules were rules. Shreya mentioned we might have a wrongful termination case since the conviction was related to protecting my child from abuse. I was too tired to fight another battle. Finding a new job could wait until Theo was more stable. Diego got moved to a halfway house after serving 4 months. I visited him every Sunday afternoon. He looked thinner and older than before. "I'd do it again," he said the first time I visited, but I could see how being locked up had changed him. He was quieter now, more careful about everything. He got a job at a warehouse that hired people with records, making half what he used to earn in construction. His girlfriend had found a second job to cover rent, but she looked exhausted every time I saw her. The guilt sat heavy in my stomach, knowing what my family's crisis had cost them both. Manuel closed our CPS case after 3 months of monitoring. His final report noted that I was a protective parent who used poor judgment under extreme circumstances. Theo was gaining weight steadily, and his therapist reported good progress with the food-related trauma. The nightmares were happening less often, though he still sometimes asked if he'd earned his meals. Mr. Johnson sent home daily reports about Theo's progress at the new school. He was making friends with 2 other kids who liked dinosaurs. He ate his whole lunch every day without asking permission first. These normal kid things felt like huge victories after everything we'd been through. Ibrahim kept investigating Mr. Oblique's history and found 2 more schools where he'd left under unclear circumstances. Parents from those schools started reaching out with their own stories about weird punishment systems and kids being afraid to eat. The pattern was clear, but Mr. Oblique had always moved on before anyone connected the dots. The district scheduled a hearing 2 weeks later, where Faith walked into the packed room carrying a thick folder. She sat at the witness table and opened her notes with shaking hands while the board members watched. Her voice started quiet, but got stronger as she read dates and times she'd reported concerns about Mr. Oblique. She showed emails she'd sent to the principal about kids crying after lunch and parents asking about weird food rules. The principal had written back each time saying Mr. Oblique's test scores were the best in the district. Faith pulled out more papers showing she'd documented 12 separate incidents over 3 months. Board members started shifting in their seats as she described finding Theo alone in the classroom during lunch. She'd asked Mr. Oblique about it, but he said Theo preferred eating alone because of his autism. The union rep kept objecting, but Faith kept reading her documentation with steady determination. She finished by saying she'd been told to stop making waves or find another school. The room went completely silent after she sat down. 3 days later, Mr. Oblique's lawyer sent a letter to the district announcing his immediate retirement. The news spread through parent group texts within hours, and people had mixed reactions. Some parents said it was unfair to force out a veteran who served his country. Others said good riddance to someone who hurt vulnerable kids. Shreya called to tell me Mr. Bleak would keep his full pension and benefits. The district wanted to avoid a messy public trial that would expose their failures. I felt sick knowing he'd face no real consequences for what he did to Theo, but Shreya reminded me that at least he couldn't hurt any more kids in classrooms. Meanwhile, Theo was making slow progress with eating at his new school. Mrs. Johnson sent daily notes about his meals and snacks. Monday, he ate half his sandwich without asking permission first. Tuesday, he finished his apple slices and asked for more. Wednesday, he drank his whole juice box during snack time. But Thursday, he asked if he'd earned his lunch, and Mr. Johnson had to remind him food wasn't a reward. Friday was better, and he ate everything without any questions about earning it. Each normal meal felt huge after months of him starving himself. The small victories kept me going through the job search that wasn't going well. Most places ran background checks, and my trespassing conviction showed up immediately. I finally got hired as a night security guard at a warehouse 40 minutes away. The pay was terrible compared to my old job, but the hours worked for Theo's schedule. I could sleep while he was at the school and be home when he got back. Diego's girlfriend Maria started helping with pickup when I had to sleep before my shift. She never complained, even though I knew money was tight with Diego still locked up. The district's lawyer called Shreya about settling our civil claim in early March. They offered enough to cover Theo's medical bills and 2 years of therapy. The settlement included standard language about admitting no wrongdoing or liability. Shreya pushed for more, and they added another year of therapy coverage. We signed the papers in a conference room while lawyers shuffled documents around. Nobody mentioned Mr. Bleak's name or what he'd done to my son. The check arrived 2 weeks later, and I immediately set up Theo's therapy fund. 6 months after that Friday night confrontation, Ibrahim published his final article about the case. He'd interviewed experts about institutional failures and protecting vulnerable students. The article mentioned that Mr. Bleak declined all requests for comment about the allegations, but the former principal admitted in a careful statement that mistakes were made. She said the district had learned valuable lessons about oversight and student safety. Ibrahim included statistics about how many teachers with concerning histories simply moved districts. The article went viral and got picked up by bigger news outlets. People argued in the comments about whether Mr. Bleak was a villain or victim. Manuel scheduled our final CPS meeting for a Tuesday morning in April. He reviewed all the documentation from Theo's doctors and therapists over the past months. Theo was gaining weight steadily, and his blood work looked normal again. The therapist's reports showed he was making good progress with food-related anxiety. Manuel typed up his final report while I sat there watching nervously. He read it out loud when he finished, noting I was a protective parent who used poor judgment. The report said my actions came from desperation to protect my child from ongoing abuse. It wasn't exactly a glowing review, but it meant no more supervision or monitoring. I signed the paperwork closing the case and walked out feeling lighter than I had in months. That same week, Missy Johnson sent home a note that made me cry happy tears. Theo had eaten his entire lunch without any prompting or questions about earning it. Even better, he'd noticed another kid struggling with math and offered to help. She said he was patient and kind, explaining the problem in different ways until the other kid understood. These normal childhood moments felt incredible after everything we'd been through together. Diego got released to a halfway house after serving 4 months of his sentence. I visited him that first Sunday, and he looked older and thinner than before. He'd lost his construction job and most of his muscle mass from sitting in a cell, but he said he'd do it again without hesitation if Theo needed protecting. His girlfriend had been working 2 jobs to cover their rent while he was gone. The guilt about what my family crisis cost them sat heavy in my chest. Diego found work with a contractor who specifically hired people with criminal records. The pay was half what he made before, but he was grateful to be working. We didn't talk much about that night in the classroom anymore, but our bond was stronger than ever after what we'd been through together. At Theo's therapy session the following week, something beautiful happened that showed real progress. He drew a picture of our family that included Diego standing next to us. When the therapist asked about it, Theo said Diego was his protector who kept him safe. He told her he wasn't scared anymore because he knew we'd always protect him. The therapist pulled me aside after to say Theo was making remarkable progress with his trauma. She warned that the road ahead would still be long with setbacks along the way. But seeing Theo trust again and feel safe made every sacrifice worth it completely. 3 weeks later, I was picking up groceries when I spotted her near the frozen foods section. The mom who'd first told me about the locked door training sessions was loading ice cream into her cart. She saw me and walked over immediately, leaving her cart behind. Her hand touched my arm, and she said thanks for doing what the rest of us were too scared to do. The relief on her face made my chest feel lighter than it had in months. She told me her daughter was eating lunch normally now and wasn't afraid of teachers anymore. We stood there for a minute just nodding at each other before she went back to her shopping. The next morning, I got an email from the school district about their new reporting system. Any concerns about student welfare would go straight to the district office now, instead of stopping at principals. They were calling it the Theo Protocol in the documentation, though they didn't use his last name in public announcements. The form had a direct hotline number and promised investigations within 48 hours of any report. I printed it out and stuck it on my fridge where I could see it every day. Ibrahim called me that afternoon with news that made my stomach turn. He'd been tracking Mr. Bleak through social media and found him advertising private tutoring in Arizona. The website promised military-style academic training for building mental toughness in young students. The testimonials from parents talked about how much more disciplined their kids had become. Ibrahim said he'd contacted authorities there, but without criminal charges, they couldn't do anything. At least he was far from any classroom full of vulnerable kids who had to see him every day. Theo's next doctor appointment showed he'd gained 8 pounds and was back in the healthy range. The nutritionist said his blood work looked great, and his energy levels were where they should be. We stopped at the ice cream shop on the way home to celebrate. Theo ordered chocolate chip without asking if he'd earned it first. He ate the whole cone while telling me about a book he was reading at the school. The smile on his face while he licked melted ice cream off his fingers was worth everything we'd been through. Summer passed with swimming lessons and library visits and normal kid stuff. Fall came and Theo started 3rd grade in his new school with the same aide from last year. Missy Johnson sent home a note after the first week saying he was reading 2 levels above grade. He'd made friends with 3 kids who invited him to sit with them at lunch. She said he barely needed her help anymore except when the cafeteria got too loud. The resource teacher mentioned Theo was helping other kids with their reading during free time. By October, he was going to birthday parties and having playdates without any issues. Diego got out of the halfway house just before Thanksgiving and came to dinner at our place. We decided to take Theo camping the next weekend to a spot we'd gone as kids. Diego borrowed a tent and sleeping bags from his new boss at the construction company. We drove 3 hours to the mountains and set up camp near a creek. That first night, Theo lay between us in the tent, counting stars through the mesh window. He counted to 100, then started laughing about losing track and having to start over. The sound of his real laugh echoing off the trees fixed something broken inside me. Diego reached over and ruffled Theo's hair, and we all just laid there listening to the creek. The next morning, Theo helped us make pancakes on the camp stove without mentioning earning them once. We hiked to a waterfall and skipped rocks and acted like a normal family on a normal trip. On the drive home, Theo fell asleep against Diego's shoulder in the back seat. I watched them in the mirror and felt grateful for my brother who gave up so much to protect my son. 6 months later at Theo's annual review, the whole team recommended transitioning him to general education full-time. The special education director said he'd only need check-ins when things got overwhelming, but no dedicated aid. The principal promised they'd learned from past mistakes and would protect him properly this time. She handed me her personal cell number and said to call if anything seemed wrong. The psychologist said Theo had made remarkable progress processing his trauma through therapy. His teacher showed me writing samples where his creativity was really starting to shine through. Everyone agreed he was ready for this next step, with just minimal support services in place. That night after dinner, Theo asked me something that stopped me cold. He wanted to know if Mr. Bleak was a bad person or just confused about helping. I sat down next to him on his bed and thought about how to answer honestly. I told him sometimes people who think they're helping do harmful things instead of good things. He nodded slowly and said he understood that Mr. Bleak was wrong about the warrior stuff. Then he looked at me and said he was glad I helped him, even when it was scary to do it. He hugged me tight, and I knew deep in my bones we were going to be okay. And that's where we'll wrap it today. I hope this story gave you something warm to carry with you, even just a little spark. Thanks for being here. It really does mean a lot. Subscribe if you'd like to keep sharing these good moments together.